Welcome to Speak English Podcast with Rory and Alex.
Have you ever had that experience, and I know you have because everyone has, where you're scrolling through your phone, maybe you're waiting for a train or standing in line, and your mind is completely neutral, even bored. Then, in the span of like 3 seconds, you click on some article, see a headline, or read a comment about a topic you genuinely don't even care about.
Right.
And suddenly you feel this intense physical surge of heat, and you are tapping out a furious, all-caps reply.
Oh, absolutely. It's the modern paradox in action, that intense, visceral feeling of outrage that seems to just materialize out of nowhere.
Exactly.
Out of nowhere. And that emotion, it feels so personal. But the content that delivered it was completely impersonal. It was designed not for, genuine information exchange, but purely for that immediate, powerful reaction. It's a very specific chemical attack on our attention span.
A chemical attack. That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
And that feeling, that source of synthetic fury, has become so formalized by the digital ecosystem that it's actually earned a name. A name that was shortlisted for Oxford's Word of the Year for 2025. Rage bait. And that's the core concept we are diving into today.
Rage bait is just the perfect distillation of how the digital world successfully manipulates our oldest, most primal instincts.
It's so different from old school clickbait, isn't it?
Oh, completely. Unlike generic clickbait, which, it aims for a mild curiosity, you won't believe what happened next. Rage bait has a much more specific and economic focus.
Right.
It is content deliberately crafted to elicit anger, frustration, or outright outrage, specifically because those emotions spark the highest engagement.
Comments, shares.
Exactly. Comments, shares, and just prolonged scrolling, all of which translate directly into traffic and, of course, revenue.
It's a cynical business model, and the impact of this constant emotional pressure is so profound that it reflects a massive change in how we perceive our own digital well-being.
It does.
Which leads us to another term that has really entered our essential digital vocabulary: brain rot.
That phrase, brain rot, the fact that it was selected by Oxford Languages as the word of the year for 2024, that tells you everything.
Yeah.
This reflects a genuine and growing global concern about the cognitive toll that endless, unchallenging digital consumption is taking on all of us.
And the data on its usage is it's striking. It really reflects how much this concept has taken hold in the public consciousness.
Oh, the word's usage surged by a staggering 230% between 2023 and 2024.
Wow.
And Oxford's definition, it defines it as the supposed deterioration of a person's mental or intellectual state, especially caused by the overconsumption of online content considered trivial, repetitive, or, intellectually unchallenging.
It's the feeling that the constant digital fire hose is actually making us dumber.
It is.
Which sets up our mission perfectly. We are going deep today to understand the very real neurobiological and psychological mechanisms that make us so susceptible to this manipulation. What happens when the digital world triggers an amygdala hijack?
Right. But we won't just leave you with the problem.
No. We'll look at the data proving that simple, subtle strategies, right down to changing your phone's screen settings, can help us fight back and reclaim our cognitive control.
Allowing us to think rather than just react.
Exactly.
And we've synthesized a really fascinating stack of sources for this deep dive. This includes clinical evidence on neurological responses to information, a detailed behavioral study from the University of Kentucky on reducing smartphone allure using simple psychological principles, and an analysis of the rise of global movements promoting what they call analog consciousness. Our goal here is to empower you with the knowledge to establish genuine cognitive sovereignty.
Okay, let's unpack this war for attention by starting at the source. The brain and the question of algorithmic preference.
Right.
Why do the platforms, these massive global organizations with petabytes of data on human behavior, why do they consistently prioritize anger? Why is rage the reigning champion of engagement?
Well, the answer is purely economic and, frankly, depressingly clear. Anger is algorithmically superior because it guarantees prolonged engagement. It just does.
More so than happiness or sadness.
Oh, much more. Studies analyzing millions of social media posts confirm this. Researchers found that content saturated with anger is shared significantly more often and commented on more frequently than posts expressing sadness, disgust, or even powerful positive emotions like joy or enthusiasm.
So if the platform's primary metric is time on screen, which, translates directly into boosting ad revenue.
Which it is.
And anger achieves that goal better and faster than any other human emotion, then the platforms are fundamentally incentivized to amplify and feed that anger. It's a feedback loop based on profit, regardless of the societal cost.
And that economic incentive creates a profound psychological vulnerability in us. And here's where it gets really interesting. And it demonstrates why you cannot simply rely on your intelligence or your conscious effort to avoid being sucked into the digital drama.
Okay.
We have to look at this crucial finding concerning automatic emotional contagion.
Right. I think most people operate under the belief that if they see an inflammatory post, they can just apply reason, step back, and choose whether or not to engage. It's a matter of willpower. Right?
Yep, you think so. But the research on emotional contagion, especially concerning anger, suggests that willpower is often a secondary defense mechanism. It just arrives too late.
Too late.
Yeah. Studies found that anger contagion occurs automatically. Participants exposed to angry expressions, even subliminally or when they were mentally distracted by other tasks, they reported feeling angry themselves almost immediately.
Wait. You're telling me the emotion of anger spreads through a crowd, or I guess through a feed, without requiring conscious processing or agreement?
Precisely. The research had this fascinating control. They found that happiness, while also contagious, required the participants' full attention to spread effectively. You had to actively see and process the happy stimulus.
Okay.
Anger, however, spread regardless of whether the participant was fully attentive or distracted by some mental task.
So the implication there is staggering.
It is. The implication is that you cannot think your way out of emotional contagion with anger. Your conscious effort to stay rational or detached is often just insufficient to protect you because the emotion is caught at a preconscious, primal level.
It's like catching a cold before you even realize you've been sneezed on.
That's a great analogy.
And that takes us directly to the engine room of the brain and this concept of the amygdala hijack, which is the physical manifestation of that automatic contagion.
Right. The amygdala is not just a part of the brain. It is the brain's evolutionary threat detection system.
Okay.
It's a set of almond-shaped nuclei hardwired deep in the temporal lobe, designed to prioritize survival, scanning the environment, and now that includes our digital environment, for anything that might require a lightning-fast fight-or-flight decision.
And it operates in milliseconds.
Milliseconds. Yeah. It often initiates a response before the conscious, rational prefrontal cortex has had time to fully process what's even happening.
So when our amygdala detects that threat, even if it's a completely benign headline made to look inflammatory by the language used, what happens chemically to initiate the hijack?
When that perceived threat, that perfectly tailored piece of rage bait, is detected, the amygdala fires, triggering a rapid release of stress hormones, primarily cortisol, which prepares the body for a sustained defense, and adrenaline, or epinephrine, which provides that immediate rush of energy and focus.
Right.
But here is the crucial addictive component. This stress response is paired with a simultaneous release of dopamine.
Dopamine. So that combination is a potent mix. We get the physiological stress of the fight or flight response, but because we are doing something about the perceived threat, typing, commenting, sharing, we also get a reward hit.
Exactly. The cortisol and adrenaline provide an energizing sensation, that urgent motivation to act, to comment, or to argue. And the dopamine provides the immediate sense of reward and motivation for taking that action. This hormonal cocktail creates an energized sensation that feels immensely rewarding because you're acting on an immediate, powerful imperative, even though it's physiologically draining and stressful.
And that's the foundation of the addictive feedback loop.
That's it.
Let's focus on that addictive quality because that's what keeps users glued to the screen for hours, cycling between doom scrolling and aggressive commenting. We need to talk about dopamine and learned reinforcement.
Well, dopamine is the key neurotransmitter for reward, motivation, and pleasure. It's activated by fundamental ancient survival drives like food, thirst, and sex, and unfortunately, it is the primary target of highly addictive substances.
And I read that a researcher at Stanford explicitly noted that social media has essentially drugified human connection.
Yes. By tapping directly and artificially into this powerful reward system.
And the social media platforms have perfected the delivery of that instant validation hit.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about the immediate gratification cycle. When your angry engagement, the effort you expended to type out that furious reply, receives social validation, whether it's likes or supportive replies from people who agree with you.
Or even angry replies from the other side.
Or even angry counter-reactions from opponents, yes. Your brain interprets this activity as positive, necessary reinforcement, and this just floods the dopamine pathways.
It sounds remarkably similar to the neurochemical mechanisms we see in substance addiction patterns, where the brain seeks the hit and then builds rituals around getting it.
That is because the underlying neurological compulsion is fundamentally the same. Research out of Johns Hopkins found that when moral outrage receives positive social support, the brain's reward pathways flood with positive reinforcement, creating this compelling cycle of compulsion. And since the risks of expressing outrage online are minuscule compared to the potential physical or social consequences of confronting someone face to face,
Yeah, of course.
the reward remains strong without the typical social braking mechanisms. You get all the chemical benefit with none of the evolutionary danger.
And as with any system driven by addiction and reward, over time, the body builds tolerance. It requires a larger, stronger dose to get the same effect.
That is the defining principle of learned emotional reinforcement. Mildly irritating content no longer generates the same satisfying emotional surge.
Right.
Your amygdala builds tolerance, meaning you require increasingly extreme, inflammatory, or fringe material to feel that necessary hit of energized reward.
This explains the observable phenomenon we see every day, the dark pipeline of digital radicalization.
Precisely. We observe how individuals who start with relatively minor, mainstream political rants or debates gradually progress toward consuming and sharing increasingly extreme, fringe, or outright baseless conspiracy theories.
They're chasing the dragon.
They're chasing the necessary dopamine surge that only maximal outrage can provide.
So the addictive cycle is a physical, relentless progression. The cue is the inflammatory headline or the outrageous post.
Right.
The craving is the automated emotional anticipation and the physiological urge to act.
Mm-hmm.
The response is the click, the share, or the comment. And the reward is the potent dopamine surge combined with the validation from your online cohort.
That's the cycle.
Understanding this chemical reality is step one toward reclaiming control, because it shows us that the fight is not just ideological, it's neurological.
So if our anger is contagious and our engagement is chemically rewarded, then the next logical step for algorithmic design is to make sure we don't apply any rational thought at all.
Right. We need to understand the psychological bypasses that platforms engineer. And that brings us to the core dichotomy in how our brains process information, especially news and misinformation.
This understanding comes from some really sophisticated neurophysiological research. They utilize tools that measure responses outside of our conscious control, like eye tracking and heart rate variability, or HRV.
Okay.
And these studies confirm that we process news and digital information via two distinct competing paths.
Path one, let's call it the high road. That's the one we want to be on when we're making critical decisions.
That is cognitive processing. This is careful, deliberate, and effortful thinking occurring primarily in the cortical brain regions, the prefrontal cortex.
The logical part of the brain.
Exactly. The part responsible for logic, analysis, and critical judgment. In lab settings, we measure this by eye fixations. The greater the number of fixations and the longer they last, the more effort the user is expending to process and analyze the information.
And this cognitive engagement is absolutely crucial for correctly identifying and resisting fake news.
It's everything.
And path two, the low road, is the one social media design is attempting to hijack.
That's effective processing. This is the unconscious, automatic evaluation of information. It operates much faster in the subcortical brain region where the amygdala resides.
So it's emotion-driven, gut-based.
Completely. And we measure this automatic response using heart rate variability, or HRV.
Okay, so how exactly does HRV give us a window into this effective state?
Right.
Most people only hear about heart rate in the context of, fitness.
Right. Well, HRV measures the tiny natural variation in time between consecutive heartbeats. This timing is controlled by the autonomic nervous system, which has two branches.
The parasympathetic.
The parasympathetic system, which promotes rest and digest, that's calmness, high HRV. And the sympathetic system, which initiates the fight or flight response. That's stress, low HRV.
So psychological discomfort, threat perception, or even high cognitive load causes that sympathetic system to dominate.
Yes, leading to a much more monotonous, less variable heart rhythm, meaning lower HRV.
So when a user is stressed, uncomfortable, or facing a cognitive contradiction, their heart rhythm becomes less flexible. It's essentially signaling an unconscious alert state, even if the person consciously reports feeling fine.
Exactly. Lower HRV indicates that the user is experiencing an automatic state of psychological discomfort or threat, which is a key precursor to the amygdala hijack.
So we have eye fixations tracking conscious effort.
And HRV tracking automatic subcortical emotional activation.
Now let's look at how the architects of misinformation use specific linguistic cues to target these two processes at the same time, ensuring the user is both mentally lazy and emotionally stressed.
The language of fake news is highly refined. Researchers analyzing deceptive content found it's qualitatively different from truthful content, primarily because, those creating the fake narratives, they lack the necessary facts and details.
So they have to rely on structural tricks.
They do.
Let's discuss how fake news executes cognitive evasion, tricking the brain into thinking it has analyzed the information when it really hasn't.
Okay, so this is a really nuanced finding related to article complexity and length. The studies found that generally, longer fake news articles tended to trigger more cognitive processing.
Why is that?
Probably because a longer, more detailed article just appears more authoritative and persuasive, and that prompts the reader to invest time.
Makes sense.
However, here's the insidious twist. Fake news, written with significantly lower linguistic complexity, that is, text that is very easy to read, requiring minimal education to comprehend, is strongly associated with a major reduction in cognitive processing.
So if the fake news is long enough to look like a comprehensive argument,
Yeah.
simple enough to fly past without having to use your cortical brain, it works better.
Precisely.
That's like the fast food of information.
Yeah.
It's easy to consume quickly, but it provides no critical substance.
That analogy is perfect. Users generally tend to be cognitive misers. We minimize effort wherever possible. So if a long article is also incredibly easy to read, it gives the appearance of information density without requiring the critical analysis necessary to spot inconsistencies.
And this documented lack of cognitive processing is a major factor in believing misinformation.
A huge factor. The brain basically says, looks comprehensive, feels easy, I must be done.
That's the cognitive trap. Now for the second and perhaps the most powerful tool for rage bait, the effective hijack, where they use sophisticated language to generate unconscious distress.
This research finding is highly counterintuitive, but it's central to understanding the digital amygdala hijack.
Okay.
Researchers looked at which linguistic cues specifically affected the user's affective state, that low HRV state. They discovered that users were most likely to experience psychological discomfort and sympathetic dominance when fake news was written with a higher density of words reflecting analytic thinking.
Wait, I have to challenge that. Analytic words, for example, words like think, know, but else, reason, they sound smart, rational, and structured.
They do.
Why would language designed for careful analysis be the very thing that triggers an automatic fight-or-flight stress response in the reader?
Because it triggers profound cognitive dissonance, and the affective system registers that dissonance immediately. The analytic language gives the fake news a compelling, authoritative structure. It looks truthful and persuasive. The brain processes this apparent truthfulness. But if the core content, the underlying argument of the article, fundamentally contradicts the user's deeply held pre-existing worldview, the brain is put in an intolerable double bind.
A double bind where the visual structure says this is factual and reasoned, but the emotional core says this is wrong and therefore a threat.
Precisely. That psychological tension, the clash between the conscious acceptance of the structure and the unconscious rejection of the core message, that's what triggers the affective state of discomfort. It's the sympathetic nervous system screaming, alert, threat detected, resolve the tension now.
So the mechanism is far more sophisticated than simply, I read an article that makes me angry. It's, I read an article that is deceptively structured to look true, but which violates my reality, and that internal contradiction triggers an automatic physical stress response.
And that stress response, that low HRV state, is the key vulnerability for algorithmic manipulation. Because the affective response is so uncomfortable, it encourages an immediate rash decision intended to relieve the psychological tension.
Right, and the easiest way to do that.
Often, the easiest way to relieve the tension and get an immediate dopamine reward is to share the content, comment, or participate in the outrage, allowing the amygdala to complete its pre-programmed response cycle. The effective hijack primes you for the rage bait reward.
This changes the entire conversation about misinformation. It's not just about critical reading skills. It's about a design strategy that maximizes unconscious psychological discomfort. They are literally designing the platforms to provoke the amygdala hijack because automated stress is the most reliable driver of profitable engagement. So if the design of the digital world is based on psychological warfare against our prefrontal cortex, understanding the problem is step one, but reclaiming agency requires practical, low-friction tools. We need to find ways to circumvent their design tricks without having to rely entirely on willpower, which we know is fragile.
It is.
The behavior we are trying to mitigate here is problematic smartphone use.
That's the clinical term for it. An inability to regulate one's engagement with the mobile phone, which eventually leads to demonstrable negative consequences in daily life.
And the research links this to all sorts of issues.
Oh, yeah. Longitudinal research consistently links this problematic use to increased anxiety, depressive symptoms, stress, and a measurable decrease in overall subjective well-being. It's a chronic stressor.
Let's look at why these devices become so utterly irresistible and how technology companies exploit our basic wiring. It all boils down to a core psychological principle known as salience.
Salience is a perceptual bias. It describes the powerful phenomenon where directing attention to a specific portion of the environment elevates its perceived importance, its weight in our judgment, and our subsequent action.
And tech design just exploits this ruthlessly.
Ruthlessly. I mean, think about notification features, the ringing, the vibrating, the constantly refreshed red icons. They are all tailored to use salience to capture your attention and make the phone the single most important object in your visual field.
And color specifically is a turbocharger for salience.
Absolutely. Color is one of the most effective, primal drivers of overt attention and appeal. The carefully curated, vibrant color schemes, from the high-contrast logos to the universally recognized alerting red notification badges, are all calculated to maximize the visual reward and attraction of the device.
So if the phone is constantly shouting at you in this beautiful, compelling visual language, it makes it incredibly difficult to choose a quieter, less salient analog activity.
It does, and this realization that the colors are essentially the siren song luring us away from productivity led to a brilliant and simple behavioral economics intervention.
Let's detail the study conducted by the University of Kentucky designed to reduce the smartphone's allure by reducing that crucial salience.
Right. The study involved pharmacy students and was designed to be low effort yet high impact, focusing on changing the device's environment rather than demanding endless willpower. It was a 3-week intervention requiring 4 specific tasks.
Okay, so first, the visual attack on salience.
Participants had to change their smartphone's color setting to grayscale mode. This immediately desaturates the entire digital experience.
Second, the attack on immediate auditory and attention capture.
They were required to disable notifications for all social media applications. This eliminates the anxiety-inducing ping and the constant flashing of the red badges.
Third, the environmental accessibility and cognitive friction intervention.
They were instructed to remove all social media icons from the primary home screen. This forces an extra step, a search or a folder open to access the content, creating crucial cognitive friction.
And fourth, the necessary sleep protection measure.
Participants had to place the device away from the bed when sleeping.
This approach is fascinating because instead of relying on brute force digital detox, which often triggers feelings of withdrawal and failure, this intervention attempts to psychologically circumvent the design mechanisms that draw our attention to the phone in the first place.
And the thematic analysis of 173 qualitative responses revealed overwhelming positive results across 20 unique themes.
Okay, so let's start with the direct, measurable impact of the visual change on device attraction.
The study participants explicitly cited grayscale mode as the leading factor that led to reduced allure. They realized the phone simply wasn't as interesting without that dopamine hit of color.
And I love this quote from one participant who said, "I noticed spending less time on social media because I was frustrated about not being able to see the pictures in color."
It's perfect, isn't it? The finding was especially pronounced for visually oriented platforms. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. When they're rendered in monochrome, they immediately lose their addictive, quick-hit appeal.
This demonstrates precisely how powerful the salience principle is in driving non-productive, casual browsing.
When the reward signal, the color, is muted, the impulse just fades.
And beyond just usage reduction, the simple act of muting the screen led to direct, tangible improvements in mental state.
Yeah, 15% of participants reported direct improvements in overall well-being, specifically noting significant reductions in stress and anxiety. The act of disabling notifications was cited repeatedly. As one person stated, keeping the notifications off in particular decreased my anxiety level.
So the reduced distraction seemed to dissipate that constant, low-level ambient pressure of always being on call.
It did, and the simple act of placing the phone away from the sleeping area had a powerful impact on sleep hygiene.
Better sleep. That was one of the most frequently cited benefits, wasn't it?
It was, accounting for 20% of all reflective responses. Students reported improved sleep quality and quantity. One student commented, "I found keeping my phone away from my bed helped me fall asleep before midnight rather than staying up until 1:0 to 2:0 a.m. looking at random things."
Which aligns directly with robust research showing that blue light exposure and late-night scrolling just destroy the body's natural circadian rhythm.
Exactly.
They also found that these restrictions helped pull people out of their devices and back into their immediate environments.
Yes, there were marked interpersonal gains. Participants observed improved quality and face-to-face interactions because the phone was less of a distraction in the presence of others.
And there was a crucial anecdote from a participant who noted that they and their spouse spent much less time on our phones and became more connected.
And enjoyed our time together more.
Yeah, that's powerful validation for the idea that digital addiction often comes at the expense of relational depth.
And finally, the challenge itself was an awareness tool.
Absolutely. The study made 11% of participants significantly more conscious of their usage patterns, leading them to adopt increased awareness measures, like setting timers or deleting applications outright.
So the core finding here is that rather than demanding pure willpower, the act of reducing salience creates mindfulness.
Which then fosters a stronger mental environment for regulating problematic use.
Now, while the results are compelling, we have to acknowledge the caveats, the mixed results. This isn't a perfect universal solution. That's vital for accurate implementation. Some participants found the Grayscale Mode genuinely frustrating when they needed the phone for productive tasks that relied on color recognition.
Like color-coded calendars, medical charts.
Right, or even using navigational tools.
And the change in visual processing created physical strain for a few users.
Yeah, reports included physical discomforts like headaches and eye strain. Furthermore, the behavioral economist's nightmare materialized. 6% of participants engaged in what we call compensation.
They just shifted their behavior to other devices.
Exactly. They reported simply shifting their habitual digital behavior to other devices like laptops or tablets more often. They maintained their problematic use, just on a different screen.
And the inevitable anxiety of the modern connected world, FOMO, was present.
Of course. Over 10% of responses referred to a tangible fear of missing out on critical communications or alarms, especially due to turning off notifications or not sleeping with the phone right next to them.
Which highlights how deeply integrated the smartphone is into our perceived safety and social fabric.
It is. But overall, the evidence supports the efficacy of this simple behavioral economics nudge.
Conclusively.
Yeah, a separate published study confirmed that implementing Grayscale Mode significantly reduced average daily screen time by 37.9 minutes in college students.
So the lesson is clear. Simple psychological circumvention, reducing the device's salience, may be a far more effective first line of defense against impulsive use than attempting to rely solely on willpower.
Which is constantly fatigued in the face of expert digital design.
We've established the active and passive defenses against the digital hijack, understanding the compulsion and using tools like the Grayscale solution. But cognitive sovereignty isn't just about limiting screen time. It's about actively building and maintaining cognitive health. This brings us back to the concept of the brain rot critique and the historical context of mental decline.
And while brain rot feels uniquely modern, reflecting our struggle with the fire hose of trivial content, it has deep historical roots. We can look back to Henry David Thoreau, who used the term in 1854 in his scathing critique of society's intellectual decline.
Thoreau saw this decline not just as boredom, but as a deliberate tendency to devalue complexity and intellectual rigor in favor of simplification and superficiality.
He was deeply concerned about what people were choosing to consume. He asked if anyone would endeavor to cure the brain rot, which prevails so much more widely and fatally.
And though he was critiquing the sensationalist and superficial ideas of the mid-19th century, his fear perfectly parallels the modern struggle.
It does. It's that struggle with overwhelming, unchallenging online content that seeks to reduce every complex debate to 280 characters of rage bait.
So to combat that kind of atrophy, we need activities that actively engage our complexity-seeking cortical brains, which introduces this concept of analog wellness.
Right.
And let's look at a truly remarkable piece of longitudinal research that shows the power of traditional games.
This is a robust, unparalleled study. It followed the Lothian birth cohort of 1936, a group of over 1,000 individuals in Scotland, across an incredible 68 years.
68 years.
Yeah, 68 years. Assessing their habits, including their frequency of playing analog games like cards, chess, bingo, crosswords, and board games.
So what was key finding one regarding the lifelong impact of these non-digital activities?
The results showed that playing more analog games was consistently associated with significantly less general cognitive decline. And this protective effect was observed over 2 immense time spans.
Okay.
From the participants' childhood at age 11, when their baseline cognition was measured, all the way through to later life at age 70.
Wow.
And crucially, during the most neurologically fragile period from age 70 to age 79.
So it's not just a childhood benefit. It's a sustained, measurable protection into late age. In which specific domains was this protection strongest?
The protection was particularly robust against decline in 2 crucial, highly relevant cognitive areas: memory ability and general cognitive function.
And we know from clinical studies that deficiencies in memory ability are strongly linked to the progression of mild cognitive impairment and later dementia.
Which makes this a very significant finding regarding preventative wellness.
So does this mean that even if someone didn't play many games in their youth, adopting a new cognitive hobby later in life can still yield benefits?
That is the incredibly encouraging message from Key Finding 3 concerning new habits. The study showed that individuals who increased their analog games playing frequency between age 70 and age 76 showed a measurable reduced decline in processing speed.
And processing speed, which is how quickly you can take in information, process it, and react, is one of the cognitive domains most sensitive and prone to age-related decline. Reducing that decline is a huge finding.
It's a key positive indicator. And the study provides powerful support for the widely discussed use it or lose it hypothesis.
Right.
The researchers rigorously controlled for a long list of confounding variables, including the participants' early life cognition, their lifetime education level, their social class, and their overall physical health.
And what percentage of the positive effect remained after accounting for all those powerful factors?
Get this. 64% of the positive relationship between playing analog games and later life function could not be explained by those confounding factors.
Wow.
This strong residual association suggests that the activity of playing complex, non-digital, rule-based games itself provides a protective neurological effect, supporting the use it or lose it conjecture with powerful longitudinal data.
This highlights the vital relevance of analog engagement. While digital brain training games often have mixed or controversial results,
Very mixed.
analog games, cards, chess, crosswords are an affordable, social, and fun activity with robust multi-decade evidence suggesting they genuinely help slow cognitive decline. They force us to activate those critical cortical regions that rage bait actively encourages us to bypass.
So we've mapped the individual fight against the algorithm. Now we need to look at how these individual acts of resistance are being amplified into a global collective movement.
Right. If digital platforms wield soft power over our attention and emotional states, we need a cultural counterforce that reestablishes analog values. Let's introduce the cultural intervention of World Digital Detox Day, or WDDD.
WDDD is a nonprofit movement founded in 2016 and celebrated annually on December 10th. It has expanded rapidly from a niche event into a global phenomenon, now operating in 72 countries and impacting over 7.5 million individuals worldwide.
And its mission is far larger than simply recommending people turn off their phones for a day. It's about establishing agency.
Yes. The movement positions itself not merely as a temporary wellness event, but as a global cultural intervention focused on restoring emotional sovereignty and encouraging organized collective micro-resistance against systemic digital addiction.
It's framed as a modern example of cultural diplomacy rooted in ethical wellness.
Exactly. And they have captured the counter-narrative with a powerful, memorable philosophy. Offline is the new luxury.
I love that phrase. It instantly repositions the debate.
It does. It frames attention, silence, and genuine relational depth as high-value, desirable cultural resources that need to be actively protected and restored.
Rather than defining the detox simply as restriction or deprivation,
It turns digital limitation into a status symbol.
let's look at the immense structured interventions and scale of the WDDD model, particularly their success in embedding this philosophy into educational systems.
The WDDD model has achieved widespread integration across international educational infrastructures. The program has been implemented in 126,400 schools globally,
Wow.
engaging 2.64 million children and 5.1 million parents. They recognize that the fight begins in the classroom and the home.
And their approach is structured and ethical, moving beyond simple screen time monitoring.
Absolutely. Core interventions include certified digital detox education modules designed to teach the mechanisms we've discussed today, and they implement a specific, accredited digital manners and ethics curriculum for middle and secondary school levels.
So it's about teaching responsible digital citizenship before habits become fully ingrained.
Precisely. And the program promotes consistent, sustainable lifestyle practices, not just a one-off day of abstinence.
Right. Things like no screen Saturdays.
Yes, no screen Saturdays, analog family mealtimes, or daily technology curfews. The goal is to foster a permanent reorientation toward healthier neuroemotional habits early in life, making mindful use the default, not the exception.
The scale is impressive, but does the data validate the change in behavior? Let's look at the measurable impact.
Well, empirical results from WDDD's data collection, and we're talking surveys covering thousands of students and parents across multiple international hubs, show strong, concrete behavioral changes that sustain long past the initial ON.
Okay, starting with the hard numbers on screen time reduction.
They reported a 64% average reduction in non-educational screen time within just 4 weeks post-intervention.
64%, that's huge. That suggests the education and structure provided a lasting behavioral shift, not just temporary compliance.
It does. And what about the positive shift toward analog connection?
81% of families reported a measurable increase in analog bonding activities, such as shared meals, storytelling, nature walks, and dedicated reading time.
Which validates the philosophy that when the screen is removed, families naturally revert to higher quality relational activities.
And the direct emotional and cognitive benefits for the children involved in the curriculum.
74% of students exhibited improved focus, better sleep cycles, and marked mood stability during the digital fasting phases.
And schools implementing the digital manners and ethics curriculum also reported enhanced peer interactions and a significant reduction in cyberbullying incidents.
Yeah, over a 3-month follow-up period, which demonstrates the powerful social component of this intervention.
The movement is clearly moving beyond individual choice and into the realm of policy and judicial momentum. It's demonstrating real soft power.
Their influence is growing, confirming their status as a genuine cultural force. WDDD recently filed a significant petition in the Supreme Court of India advocating for a nationwide age restriction law for social media access for children under 16 or 18.
So this represents a concerted effort to create a judicial and legislative framework to protect the young from algorithmic exploitation.
They're actively engaging governments to align policy with wellness ethics. They are working with governments and education boards in nations like India, the UAE, France, and Mauritius to align localized wellness programs.
So the ultimate goal is clear.
It is.
Yeah.
To ensure that the necessary legal and educational frameworks exist to support the goal of cognitive sovereignty for future generations, restoring attention and depth as fundamental cultural expectations.
By reframing our relationship with technology, these movements are giving individuals not just the tools, but the collective strength to reclaim agency from algorithmic control. This has been a deeply relevant and granular deep dive into the modern war for attention. We started by mapping the enemy's strategy, understanding precisely how digital design exploits our fundamental amygdala and dopamine systems to generate outrage for profit.
We learned that rage bait works not just by being provocative, but by exploiting automatic emotional contagion. We catch anger before we can even process it rationally. And we saw the crucial neurophysiological evidence proving that certain deceptive language can bypass our rational thinking entirely, triggering unconscious psychological discomfort that makes us structurally vulnerable to manipulation.
But the story of cognitive sovereignty is an empowering one. We looked at effective low-effort resistance strategies, demonstrating the power of simple psychological circumvention, the grayscale solution, which significantly reduces the salience and addictive allure of the device, giving your willpower a fighting chance.
And we looked at the long-term cognitive maintenance strategies, noting the proven 68-year longitudinal protection offered by engaging in traditional analog games like cards and chess, which strongly supports the use-it-or-lose-it hypothesis for maintaining cognitive function into late life.
And finally, we discussed the powerful cultural shift represented by World Digital Detox Day, which boldly declares that offline is the new luxury.
It does.
The practical takeaway for you, the listener, is to recognize the moment when digital engagement stops being productive and starts becoming a neurological compulsion.
And you need to be honest with yourself about the signs. Obsessive checking for the latest outrage, chronic irritability that leaks into your real-life interactions, trouble sleeping because you're mentally rehashing online arguments.
Or feeling a constant fruitless compulsion to correct misinformation online.
Right. If these resonate, you need to focus on changing your environment, not just attempting to override the chemical signal with willpower. Give your brain a chance to breathe.
And let's circle back to that truly fascinating finding in the fake news research. We discovered that articles written with complex analytic thinking words like think, no, but else, are more likely to trigger affective discomfort, that fight-or-flight stress response, in the user.
Which makes us unconsciously susceptible to being manipulated by the very language that promises rationality.
So if the design of our platforms is optimized to maximize engagement, and that engagement is most reliably driven by content that uses rage and analytic language to generate automatic psychological stress.
Here is our final thought for you to consider. How do we as citizens ensure that our necessary participation in digital society, our need to stay informed, to communicate, to participate in public discourse, remains guided by productive, thoughtful cognition rather than automated, stress-fueled psychological discomfort?
That is the ultimate test of our attention and our agency in the 21st century. Until next time, keep digging deep.